We're going to go ahead and get started, and we are recording this meeting, and it will be available after it's over on the ACT website. So welcome. I'm Eliza, and I'm with the Alaska Children's Trust, and today we have Danielle and April here from OCS to talk about what happens after you make a report, a guide to the Office of Children's Services process. And before we get started, I just want to acknowledge that I work at the Alaska Children's Trust in Anchorage, which is Dena'ina land, and I want to recognize and acknowledge the Dena'ina people. Just a little bit about ACT before we get started. So I'm Eliza, the Alaska Resilience Fellow, and we also have Kayla here today. She's our Director of Communications. And ACT's mission is to prevent child abuse and neglect. And we have tons of great stuff going on throughout the month of April, which is National Child Abuse Prevention Month. And if you're interested in learning more about what we have going on, I would recommend signing up for our listserv. And Kayla will put a link where you can sign up in the chat. Just a couple of things that we have going on in April. So we have 3 more webinars coming up after this. We have Online Safety for Youth with Special Agent Elliot Peterson from the FBI. That will be on the 19th. We have Child Sexual Abuse Prevention for Parents with Ricky Dubois from the Safe Child Advocacy Center, and that will be on April 24th. We've already had one session of that and it was fantastic. So I'd recommend you all sign up for that if you haven't had the chance yet. And then last but not least, on the 29th, we will have an introduction to HOPE, which stands for Healthy Outcomes from Positive Experiences. And that will be with myself. And we'd love to see you at all of these events. We also have interesting materials related to prevention that you can find out more about through our listserv on our website, including child sexual abuse prevention toolkits that we have available for those who are interested. And before I turn it over to Danielle and April, I just want to go over some Zoom etiquette. Make sure you're on mute when you're not speaking. April and Danielle will reserve time for questions at the end. And so save your questions then or put them in chat and we'll write them down and make sure that they get answered. And I will be monitoring the chat along with Kayla. And again, the recording will be available after the webinar if you have colleagues or friends who would like to see it. And so with that, I will turn it over to Danielle and April. Thank you so much for being here.
Awesome. Thank you, Eliza. Thank you for having us today. We're excited to be able to talk a little bit more about the OCS process and hopefully answer some questions through the time, but also at the end. We have a lot of really good information. So I'm going to share this PowerPoint before we really get going here. All right, here we go. So welcome everyone. My name is Danielle Milliron. I am the manager for the intake unit. My role, I'm also the manager for our mentor program. So our mentor program does initial training for new staff in the field and connects classroom learning to field learning. And then I also oversee currently our safety program. So we have a really new and becoming established program to advocate for the safety of our staff and to help monitor different situations as they arise. So that's a bit of my role in a nutshell. I've been with OCS for about, it's always hard to do the math because I spent a chunk of time with OCS, left, and then came back. And we always joke that if you leave, you find your way back, which is exactly what I did. So I would say about 12, 13 years. I've been in child welfare. I've tried other things and always find my way back around. So it's something I'm very passionate about. I think it's very important for our children and families. And I agree with our mission and really just strive to always meet that. I feel like my role now is really become a passion of many things, staff development and safety, and then also understanding the intake process. And with that role, I get to do things like this and talk about OCS and talk about all the things that we do, and hopefully provide some education in the process. So that's a little bit about me. I have a co-facilitator today who's wonderful. I'm going to let her introduce herself.
Hi, everyone. My name is April Stahl, and I'm an intake supervisor at OCS. I've been in the field of child welfare for 22 years, but I've been with OCS for 17. And in that time, I've done initial assessment, so investigation and assessment. I've been a supervisor since 2011. I've been the ICWA specialist for the Anchorage region and family services. So everything that you see that we're going through here, I've done it all. And so I think that that's given me a unique perspective in terms of understanding what happens from start to finish. So I'm hoping that we can answer some of your questions. And please don't hesitate to write them in the chat. We want to make sure that this is a educational experience for you all as well. So thank you for having us. And Danielle, do you want to, I didn't remember how we were starting off. Were you going to start with one, or do you want me to start?
This one, we'll let you jump into this one and then we'll,
Okay. So the mission for the Office of Children's Services is really to ensure the safety, permanency, and well-being of children. We really believe in strengthening families, engaging communities, and partnering with tribes. OCS is really responsible to serve families whose children have been determined to be unsafe or at high risk of maltreatment by their parent or caregiver.
So the first process, and really the intent of this training, we really want to talk about after you make that report. So many of you are mandated reporters, and there's often questions, what happens? I call, I get this information, and then what happens from there? So the first thing is the intake process, and that's where April and I, where we sit and we focus on. And so really what we're looking at here, we get the information, we can get the reports through phone, fax, or email, and then we really look at the information and make that initial screening decision. So essentially what that means is based on the information and what we know, if we need to call collaterals, we do that as well. But based upon that, is there enough to screen it in? Which means that there would be further investigation and assessment, which we'll get into, or do we need to screen it out? And we'll talk a little bit about reasons for both of those things, why we would screen in and why we would screen out. Once that decision is made, if we do determine to screen the report in, we have 3 priority levels that report can be screened. So those, as you see on the slide here, are P1, priority 1, priority 2, and priority 3. So essentially a priority 1, based on the information, we feel that someone needs to get out and see this child and assess child safety within that first 24 hours. So based on what we know, we believe that that child is unsafe and something needs to happen. Priority 2 would be 72 hours. So we have enough concern to believe that this child is potentially unsafe. Maybe they're not actively in danger, but we have reason to believe that something's going to happen or is happening and we need to be out there as soon as possible. So there's that 72-hour block. And then priority 3 is 7 days. So typically with this, we look at, is there an incident of maltreatment, or is there high risk within the family that we need to assess? Granted, as we do this, and we'll talk a little bit more as we get through, we are making these decisions based on the information we have. Once the field goes out, workers are assigned, they do that investigation and assessment, this could completely change. So this is really just that initial screening to help prioritize workload and to help make sure that we're prioritizing child safety first.
Okay, so let's talk about screening in. So when we are looking at the information, the initial decision to accept the report, like Danielle said, is always based on child safety. So our responsibility is to ensure that if a child is being abused or neglected, that we have to take action to prevent further harm and make sure that that child is safe. So some of the things that we're looking at is the child under 18 years old and identified as vulnerable as a vulnerable child in the family. So what that means is that you have to be able to articulate, or we have to be able to articulate really, and gather the information to determine if that child is under 18 years old and say a teenager, for example, what about the situation makes them vulnerable to the circumstances that are occurring? And that's going to look a lot different if the child is 6 or an infant than if they're 16 or 17. So it can get a little bit confusing sometimes. We do want to make sure that the identified primary caregiver who has responsibility to protect the child, the vulnerable child, and location of the caregivers and children. So we want to know who's involved, who's responsible for that child, and where is everyone located. We also will be asking questions to determine, are there circumstances that are indicative of child abuse, neglect, or threats of serious harm as defined in the statutes. So we do have to make sure that legally we are staying in our lane. I've been saying that a little bit too much lately, but you know, government overreach is a really serious thing. And so we want to make sure that the information that we're collecting keeps us in that framework. Does the report also describe family conditions, behaviors, emotions, perceptions, attitudes, etc., that appear to be out of control? So is the situation itself out of control that without some sort of intervention, it's likely to continue to occur or continue on? And we also need to determine if the information within the report is accurate. Is it reasonable to believe that a child has suffered, is suffering, or could suffer severe harm? And so that's that severity piece is what Danielle was referring to on the P1s, P2s, P3s, is that level of harm. Does the report indicate that caregivers may be or unwilling and incapable of behaving in a way that results in protecting the child? So we're going to get into that a little bit more, where we talk about safety threats and safety concerns. There may be situations that are occurring, but is there someone that is responsible as a caregiver? Are they able and willing to be protective of that child? So when we're looking at screen in, we would be thinking, based on the information that we have, that would not be the case. So these are kind of the overview. It gets a little bit more detailed than that, but that's the basic overview of what we're looking at for screen-ins.
And then we have different reasons that we would screen out as well. So I think there's the obvious, right, that we don't have enough to really show that there's concerns for child safety, or that the criteria that April described is being met. But there's a lot of other reasons that we might screen out a report. And this list goes over that as well. We have to be able to locate the family, have some idea of where we can see the child, where we can talk with the family. It's a really important piece. I think sometimes there's a lot of, we get reports and there's concern, but we just don't quite have enough of that information yet. So it's just really helpful, especially as mandated reporters, that we're able to get as much of that as possible. Maybe we just got the report from another resource, and so it's duplicate information, which we would still document, but we wouldn't necessarily need to screen it in if we've already screened it in from another reporter. Law enforcement jurisdiction only. Like April said, we got to stay in our lane. And sometimes the issue that's being reported is something for law enforcement to focus on versus us. Sometimes we work together and we both are involved. Sometimes it's just law enforcement and sometimes it's just us. So there's a lot of that we have to assess and determine when we make the decision to screen in or screen out.
May I say something?
So the other reason that we might is that the child's residing out of state. That would be another jurisdiction issue like we discussed. So we would refer that to the receiving state. And then we could also be looking at the tribe would have jurisdiction in certain cases. And so we would refer the information to the tribe.
So we wanted to supply some as up to date as possible data for you all. And so for February, we received 1,620 protective services reports. And then I went ahead and broke this out by region. So you can see Anchorage received 499 reports, Northern Fairbanks area, Interior 380, South Central 426, Southeast 178, and Western 137. So I did want to mention that, with COVID, we didn't want to get too much into it, but our primary reporting sources are the school district, hospitals, and law enforcement. And so as COVID hit and people became more isolated, it doesn't mean that the abuse or neglect isn't occurring. It just wasn't seen by the individuals who report to us on a regular basis. Okay, we can go to the next slide.
All right, so now we are going into the investigation and assessment. So we've made the determination that we are screening in the report. From there, that report gets that priority level that we discussed and then gets sent to field workers. So we have investigation and assessment unit and we have a family services unit. And we're going to talk a little bit about both. So for this stage, there's 3 decisions that are being made. Is the child safe? And what does that look like? There's different areas that we assess for safety, and we're going to talk about that. Is there enough evidence to support the allegation and that there was a maltreatment that occurred to the child? So on the slide here, it talks about, based on the information that we have, is there enough evidence to show that there's preponderance of evidence? So essentially, is there more reason to believe that it happened than it didn't, based upon the information we have? And we'll talk a little bit more about what the information collection looks like, but we have to make a finding, whether or not we believe that we should substantiate or not substantiate based upon that information. And then finally, we're determining if the family situation may be putting the child at high risk of harm. So maybe we don't have direct indications of safety, that there's concerns for child safety, but there's some risk factors there. And that's really important for us to understand, because it'll help us as we assess if there's maybe some referrals or resources that would be beneficial to provide that family. So those are the 3 areas that we're really looking at that investigation and assessment stage. And we're going to get a little bit more into things that we collect and how we get to these 3 decision points.
Okay, what we wanted to provide is a general maltreatment. So I do know that the Children's Trust has had some trainings on this before, but we just wanted to reiterate there's some signs for general maltreatment. So when we're talking about evidence and things like that, it's really important to know that just because someone might exhibit some of these behaviors doesn't mean that maltreatment itself is occurring. But what we do know from our research that when maltreatment is occurring, some of these things are present. And so it can get a little bit confusing, but this is always going back to reasonable cause to suspect for mandatory reporters. So some behavior that you might see exhibited by a parent or caregiver denies the existence of or blames the child for problems at school or home. They may ask teachers or other caregivers to use harsh physical discipline if the child is misbehaving, sees the child as entirely bad, worthless, or burdensome, demands a level of physical or academic performance that the child cannot achieve, looks primarily to the child for care, attention, to meet their own emotional needs rather than meet the needs of their children, or may show little concern for their child. Some of the indicators that we see in children are sudden changes in behavior or school performance, has not received help for physical or medical problems that the parents are aware of. And we do get a lot of those where they'll say, we'll get reports that say, there's this concern about the child. And we say, well, have you talked to the family about that? Well, no, we want to make sure that parents have the opportunity to care for their children. So the other thing that you might see is that they have some learning difficulties, problems concentrating, and it can't really be attributed to a specific physical or psychological cause. Sometimes you hear folks talking about somatoform issues, so complaints of not feeling well, maybe going to the nurse constantly, those sorts of things. Lacks adult supervision, maybe hypervigilant, or could be completely overly compliant, passive, or withdrawn. Children that are constant people pleasers, comes to school late or activities late, or stays late, does not want to go home. Sorry, y'all, just self-disclosure. I have my bifocals that don't have the line in them anymore. And so I keep moving my head and the lines are getting blurred. I apologize. The child may also be reluctant to be around a person, a specific person, complaints of physical ailments, stomachs, headache, those sorts of things that we were talking about before. I'm gonna take these off. That'll be better.
I love a good April full disclosure moment.
I have them all the time. I have no shame.
We all do. We all do. So going back to, I think it's really helpful to understand general maltreatment, because it really guides what we're looking for and things that we're seeking as we gather information to see if it's occurring, and signs, like April said, for mandated reporters, as you guys are reporting to us as well. So it's just a really good reminder and information that kind of connects then to this process. So this next area, this is the information collection. So we call this our protocol for information gathering. And this is really a list of all the people that we should be talking to when we do that information collection to then determine those further assessments that occur in the investigations and assessment process. So very first, the tribe needs to be notified and invited if they want to participate in this interview process. That should be the first, foremost that happens for every case, if applicable. Second, we want to interview the child first. And I think this is very, very important. And I think we could all make guesses as to why, but really we want that, we want the interview to be, we want it to be what it is. We don't want there to be opportunity for any kind of interference. So interviewing that child first allows for having that most genuine, open, honest interview about what's happening. So that's really critical that happen first. Then is there other children in the home? Maybe they're not alleged victims, but maybe there's other children in the home that have seen what's been going on or are aware, or may have some information that would be helpful for us. Then we want to interview the caregiver. What is their perspective of what's happening? It's really important that we get that full picture. And so as we go down, you'll see the maltreating caregiver, any other household members. Maybe there's a non-custodial parent that's not in the home, but might have some really helpful information. Are there relatives, other collaterals? Maybe the school is really involved with the child. Maybe there's a neighbor that, just a lot of different things that we could collect collateral information on. It's really important that we get the full story, and pulling in as many people that can provide that information to paint the picture of what's happening with the family is really going to be helpful as we then make that assessment and we determine what needs to happen next. So this is really our standard as we move forward with that.
So in those interviews, these are really what has been referred to as the 6 questions. This is the information that we are then reporting out. So the first area is the extent of maltreatment. What happened? And then the surrounding circumstances. That's like, what else is going on? What else is contributing to what is going on in the family? We also want to talk about child functioning, like we talked about before. Is the child vulnerable? Let's learn a little bit more about them. What does their daily functioning look like? What is their routine, their schedule, behavior in general? Adult functioning, same sort of idea. We want to take a look at, is there a criminal history that's an ongoing issue or not? This isn't just about trying to dig to find information of something that's wrong. It's what's really occurring in the family. And we don't really know that until we talk to everyone, right? I always tell everyone a report is just a report. It's really that information gathering and reporting back out is what is key. So are the parents working? Did they have a support network? You know, who do they call on in times of need? Are those people and resources available? Overall parenting practices used in the home. You know, this is really important that we're not making assumptions, that we're really talking about cultural differences that may be in play here. What does it look like for your family? And, you know, sometimes there's a disconnect. Parents will report one thing, children will report another. And that's really where we rely on, you know, other people that know the children. So where Danielle was talking about the protocol before, collaterals or family members, you know, that can give us a little bit more insight and why is there this incongruency with the info we're getting. And then disciplinary approaches in context, right? So is the discipline matching the severity of what maybe has occurred, right? So is it over the top? Do they need information on parenting that helps provide some structure in the house? So again, it's not just about pointing out, you know, the negative areas or quote unquote, what's wrong. It's also talking about, you know, what are the strengths of the family? You know, what does this look like to someone from the outside looking in, right? Yeah, I was going to bring up a case example and I thought, you know what, let's not do that because we're going to talk at the end. So I will save that for later.
Yeah, sometimes it's helpful to have context, but like April said, I think as we get to the end, we can definitely make sure we answer those questions. All right, so we're going to talk a little bit about safe versus unsafe, and then we're going to get a little bit more further into the assessment of safety to understand it even more. So on the surface, a child is safe when there are no threats of danger within the family. So we've gathered all this information, we've done our assessment. Based upon that, we determine that there's no threats of danger. Or maybe there's some concern there, but the parents possess sufficient protective factors to manage the threats. And we're going to talk about what those protective factors are. But essentially, they're areas that really help mitigate those dangers or risk factors as they escalate. For example, one example could be maybe there's some family supports that can come in and really help out. So then we wouldn't need to intervene. So those are what we would determine a child is safe if they have either one of these things are occurring in the home.
And then when we're talking about unsafe children, we're talking about identified threats of danger that exist within the family. And we have to show that the children are vulnerable to the threats, regardless of their age. It's more developmental level, their capacity to ask for help, you know, those sorts of things. Who are they dependent on? And the parents have insufficient protective factors to manage or control the threats. So no one in the home is being able to manage the safety of the children.
So the first area that we assess, we call present danger. So there's 3 criteria that we look at when we assess present danger. Is it immediate? Is it happening now? Is it significant? Is what we're seeing, the impact on that child, everything going on, is that significant? And then is it clearly observable? Can you see that it's happening? Are you able to articulate that through observation, which could be through actually literally seeing, but also through what you've collected in your interviews, maybe based upon that first interview with the child, there's been some disclosures and some concerns that, man, if that child goes home right now, we know that they're going to be actively in danger. So really this is that initial, that first assessment that we make. We want to know, are they actively in danger? And we have some tools that help us get there. This is also when we're screening at the front line with the intake process. When you look at that 24-hour response, that initial priority 1 response, this is what we're thinking about too, based upon the information we have at that point. So we make that assessment at the screening level, and then we make it again once the investigation and assessment worker goes out in the field. So there's a kind of 2 process to it. But this is that very kind of more so in your face, but not always that literal, but we know something's happening right now.
So some of the present danger examples that we have are when we have children that have injuries from being hit with excessive force, burns, or deprived of basic necessities. So what we would consider to be non-organic failure to thrive situations. Child lives in life-threatening conditions. We do get children who are unsupervised now or is alone and vulnerable. So sometimes we do get little kids that have wandered away from their homes for various reasons and they're picked up by law enforcement. Those are situations they would bring them to us and then we try to figure out where their parents are. Where did they come from? Caregivers are exhibiting bizarre behavior, suggesting risk of serious harm to the child. Sometimes that's drug induced and sometimes that is due to some mental health issues that are beyond their control. The child is extremely afraid of the home situation. So we do get those calls where they're afraid to go home and they're not going to go home. Child has significant injuries to the face and head. So that would be where a child would need to get medical attention. Caregiver engages in cruelty towards the child. The child is in need of immediate medical mental health care and the parent is unwilling or unable to obtain it. Caregivers under the influence of substances and cannot care for the child. And the caregiver has a bizarre and extreme view of the child. So again, these are, if we walked into the situation and these things were present, then we would say that's present danger examples. And we would have to do something to make sure that child is safe.
So after we assess present danger, we want to do further information collection going through the protocol and the 6 questions like we've discussed to determine if there's impending danger. So the slide says here that impending danger refers to a family circumstance where a child is living in a state of danger, a position of continual danger. So how I like to explain this in training is with impending danger, it may not be actively happening now, but we know based upon the information we've collected that it will happen again very soon. That we have enough information, we have a pattern, we have disclosures through interviews that based upon the information we have, we know that it will happen again soon. So we have a process to make that assessment. We have what we call safety threats to help guide us in that assessment. We have a lot of things that help us get there, but essentially that's what it is. And I'm going to use an example because it helps me solidify it. So I'm hoping it will help others. Well, a good example I like to use with this is maybe we have a parent where we know that they actively drink to intoxication with small children in the home every Friday night, Monday through Thursday, the weekend, everything's great. But on Friday, we know based upon patterns and history and disclosures that this happens and the children become unsafe. So we would have impending danger knowing that we have this pattern in place. So that's a very concrete example, and they're not always that concrete, obviously, but that's kind of gives you an idea of, even though it's not happening now, we know that it will happen again. Severe harm will result without safety intervention. So that's the other piece we really have to look at. What needs to happen to make sure that this child is safe and that it won't happen again. So once we do that present and then impending danger assessment, and if we determine either, there has to be some kind of intervention that occurs. And there's a couple things that we'll get into later, but essentially that could be what we call safety planning. So bringing in participants to help mitigate the safety risks that are happening or the safety factors that are happening. Or it may be that we have to file for custody of the child to ensure their safety. So there's a couple things that can happen, but when we do determine that there's present and or impending, you can have one without the other, we do have to do some kind of intervention.
So protective factors, we've talked about all these safety concerns and where there's a deficit in the families. And so we really want to take a look at protective factors because this is really what builds the family up and helps keep the children safe. So parenting resilience, anyone that's had children knows that it is not easy And it is not like what you see on TV. There are a lot of challenges that go with it. And so what as a parent helps you rebound from those tough times? Knowledge of parenting and child development, understanding what's coming, right? Are you prepared for that? What is normal behavior for a child? And is the parent's behavior really in line with that, and really understanding that, when a child is 6 years old, they don't have the ability to reason. They don't have the ability to have that forethought. And is there patience for that? Social connections, we're social creatures, and we need to be around other people. And so it's really important as a parent to have those connections. So, hey, you're not alone, right? When it gets tough, you've got people in your corner, and you have folks that you can reach out to and be like, hey, I need to go blow off some steam. I need to go have fun. We're all those people, right? I need to be connectedness. And then concrete supports in times of need. So when you're ready to go out and have fun with your friends, who can you reach out to? If there's an emergency, do you have someone that can watch your children? All of those things are incredibly important, because without those, it just creates more and more stress and more opportunity for situations to occur. Social and emotional competence of children. So how are the kids doing? What is going on with them, right? And so when we take a look at when they're safe, it's when there's no threats, like Danielle said before, or the parents' protective factors can control for those existing threats. So yeah, sometimes things can be going on, but guess what? You don't have to be perfect. You just have to be a safe parent. So this isn't, the bad parenting police. This is, we need to make sure kids are safe. And so I like to really challenge people sometimes on that thinking, because truth be told, anyone who's a parent, I'm sure we all have a moment that we would love not to have exposed. And you learn from it.
I love that explanation. I love that protective factors are part of this. It's part of the assessment. And I just wanted to throw that in there too, because it's really what really helps these families be stronger, and it can mitigate so many things if we can really do a thorough assessment of that or bring in resources. So I love your explanation of that, April. And I think it's a really great reminder that it's not all just about the safety assessment, but there's this other assessment that should be occurring as well. I'll be quick with this. I'm noticing time is going by a little quicker than we had hoped. So this is just some data on the investigations and assessments that were completed in February to give you an idea of the workload and things that our workers are doing. So it's a really helpful just to look at numbers and to see, as the day-to-day is important, but also that we look at the data as a whole as well. So I'll just leave it at that, but April did a beautiful job making this little chart for us to give us a little bit of an overview, but and we can always share that as well if people are interested.
So I think we can blow through some of this fairly quickly, because I want to make sure we have an opportunity for questions. So then what happens next? Okay, if OCS is determined, we've determined that child is unsafe and there's no one that can protect the children within that family network, then the case, we do file for custody if we have to intervene to keep that child safe. And then the department works with the family to reunify. It is really important that we help build up those protective factors so that the children can go home. It's not just it is about child safety, but our parents usually have trauma that as a result, you're seeing that trauma manifested in safety concerns for the children, and we want to help them as well. So we do case plans. We make sure that the children are able to see their parents and siblings, and then evaluations on progress. And making sure that you're talking about that on a regular basis so that the families know what to expect.
This is a lovely little flow chart of the whole court process that happens once a case does go to family services. And it shows, I'm not going to go through it thoroughly, but would be happy to, if anyone's interested, to talk with them one-on-one about it. But essentially, I just want to point out how it shows there's a legal process that's also taking place to really help guide the work being done and making sure that that the parents are having due process, that they have their rights, or they have the right to be able to share their concerns in court. And then also that the departments, the OCS, is able to share what kind of work is being done and behavioral changes being assessed, because the end goal is that we can reunify the children. We always try to reunify first, and that's always the goal, though other permanent, and we'll talk a little bit about that, but other things can occur if that's not able to happen safely. But really the court process helps show what's being done, what changes are happening, and what we'd like to see in the future. So this is a nice little flow chart, but it shows there's a lot of things that happen too.
So we want to talk about efforts. And so when OCS is working with a family, we're required to provide reasonable efforts to the family. And that is consistent attempts to offer the family support and services made during a reasonable time period. And so those services are to prevent or eliminate the need for placement, like we talked about. Can we go and return the children home while we're continuing to work with the family? So that safety is constantly being assessed throughout the life of the case. The services are to make it possible for the children to return home or to find an alternative permanent placement. So if we're not able to reunify, if that is not looking like that, that is what is going to happen, then reasonable efforts require us to find an alternative permanent placement for that child, meaning adoption or guardianship or something else.
So we also have active efforts, and this is an ICWA law. So this is something that's specific to ICWA cases. I won't get super into it, but I'd be happy again to talk through. I just know we're running out of time, but really it's efforts that are designed to prevent the breakup of the Indian family. I like to think of it as the analogy that's been given to me, and it's not the greatest, but it helps me. Reasonable efforts, you're at the grocery store, you ask where are the oranges, and they tell you, oh, it's on this aisle. Active efforts is the person takes you to the oranges, shows you the selection, and provides that extra support. So that's essentially the difference here. Is it's a little bit extra work or extra effort there that we want to provide to make sure that we're recognizing the needs of those families.
So this is a really important topic, and we can go on and on and on about this. And I feel bad not giving it its due justice and having this conversation. But what we do know is that disproportionality is a real issue, as well as racial bias and removals. And so the Child Welfare League of America, it wasn't until I believe it was 2001, actually did apologize to our Alaska Native and American Indian populations for mass removals based solely on those things, the racial bias and not really understanding cultural differences. And so we know that not only is it at removal where there's racial disparities, it's also occurring at various decision-making points in the case. And so there's lots of reasons to why that is, and explore that. And it starts with reporting. So again, I feel like we're not really doing this topic justice because it is so huge, but we feel like we really need to talk about that as a community, as a state, and addressing it. And OCS is doing that, and I'm very excited that we're being very open about that.
Agreed. And I wish we had more time to do it justice too. But this is another beautiful slide that April created with some data. And so again, disproportionality is fact, and this is exactly why. And I think this data shows exactly what that looks like. Like April said, though, efforts are being made to try to address it and to really look at, even from reporter on, what we're doing to make sure that we're challenging our biases throughout the process. So again, I'm happy to share this, but this is just some numbers that she pulled that is really interesting and really helpful on this topic.
Okay, so where do you report? We really want to, sorry, I had someone else message me privately. We will make sure that everyone has a copy of the PowerPoint that would like one. So what we would really like to see happen, our preferred method is that you call our hotline. That is really the fastest way to get us the information. Reports can also be emailed to us, or you can fax it to us, but you don't have to do all three. You can just do one. And our hold time, at least the last time I looked, was 19 seconds. So that may vary depending on the day, but generally speaking, we have someone that can answer the phone pretty quickly. And there is an additional requirement that Danielle will mention, and then Danielle, I'll let you wrap up.
Perfect. So we wanted to make sure this was in here, as I know most of you are mandated reporters, and the goal of this is not a mandated reporter training, but it's important since this change happened very recent, September 1st, 2020. But essentially, it is now in statute that if a suspected child sexual abuse is being reported to OCS, that the reporter is to also report that to the local law enforcement. So I like to put out there, if you're unsure how to do that or who to contact, you can call us first and we can tell you the law enforcement agency that would need to go to. So we can help guide that process if there's questions or confusion. All right, and that's our presentation. We have about 10 minutes for questions. So I want to definitely make sure that we allow for that and hopefully can guide and answer. So feel free.
I don't know if anyone has been logging the questions in the chat. Just look at
We
this
do have
last.
one in the chat.
Okay.
Nancy asks, I'm a school nurse. I've noticed that the screen out or screen in documentation is not getting to us within 24 hours. Is OCS aware of this, and what do you suggest be done?
Well, there's two things. One is, are you talking about the letter? Just so I'm clear.
Yeah.
Or I don't know if they're still with us. So there used to be the letter that was sent automatically that was basically a mandatory reporter feedback letter. And what we're really trying to work towards is not relying on those letters, but more of having a conversation. And that's why we're really trying to encourage people to call. And so I'm not even sure that, and I'll have to double check on it, but I'm not even sure that the mandatory reporter letters are even functional anymore. They used to be automatically sent, but I'm not sure that that is even a thing anymore. So Danielle, we might need to follow up on that.
Yeah, we can definitely follow up. I believe that they are, but if you guys are, as mandated reporters, are seeing that that's not happening, we will follow up on that and make sure that it's addressed. But like April said, just to kind of go back to it, if you haven't heard and you want to know, or you do have the right to know the screen in, screen out as a mandated reporter, give us a call and we can definitely provide that to you. And like April said, the whole time is typically limited, so hopefully we can get that to you if it's needed or helpful. We must have had a really thorough presentation, April.
And I always feel so bad because it seems like they go so fast and I'm like, oh my gosh, I wish we could talk about this more.
I know there's definitely so much more to it, and I feel like it doesn't do it justice to talk about in an hour, but hopefully it at least give you a picture of what we do and what we look at.
Hello, my name is Constance Carlisle. Oh, you can
go ahead, Constance. No, you got it.
Okay, my name is Constance Carlisle. I'm a counselor split between two elementary school, Baxter Elementary and College Gate. And I completed my Master of Social Work at the Office of Children's Services in Anchorage a few years ago. And during that time, I developed a program that would help or assist families in working more closely with their service providers. So I work a few hours a week with Cook Inlet Tribal Council. I was with them full time for about 2.5 years, and I currently work with them a few hours a week still working with families who have active OCS cases. And what I do is I hold monthly meetings for the families, multidisciplinary service provider meetings with their attorneys and ICWA workers, tribal members, guardian ad litems, the OCS caseworker, and our participants to help them to understand the process, to help them navigate the OCS process. And I must say that the program has gone really well for a lot of our families, and I'm hoping to see more of that happening in the future with not just Alaska Natives and American Indians, but with all families who have OCS cases.
Thank you, Constance. That's wonderful. Collaboration is what makes this work, right? The more we can work together and see the value in that, the better our families are going to be. So thank you for sharing.
Of course.
I'm seeing another question. Hi, Howard. Where do the majority of the reports of harm come from? Our three main reporting sources are law enforcement, schools, and hospitals. And so when we're talking about racial disparities in terms of disproportionality, it's also paying attention for those reporting sources and why reports are being made the way they are. And we've really launched a new, I don't want to say initiative, but a new way of reaching out to our community partners to address that issue and really have honest conversations. So yeah, but those are the three primary.
We have just about 5 minutes left. If anyone else has a question they'd like to unmute and say or put in the chat.
So I see a question just popped in. Do you anticipate changes and improvements in your workload with the DHHS split? You know, it's hard to answer that, and I wish I could. I don't see much changing as far as the workload, since we will still maintain our division as a whole, and we will just be moved over to the new division or the new Department of Community and Family Services. And there's nothing in terms of extra positions or anything like that. And honestly, we're like most agencies right now, just trying to stay above hiring and retention. And I think that will happen regardless. But I hope so. I hope that there's some helpful changes that come out of that. And I'm optimistic about it for us. But in regards to workload, it's a hard thing to predict, I think. All right.
I think we're good. I don't know if anyone else has any other questions.
I could put my email here in the chat. If sometimes, I know for me, when I go to a training or any kind of conversation, I think of something way after. So I'm going to put my email if that happens and you want to reach out with any questions or follow up.
Great. Thank you so much, Danielle and April. I have personally learned a lot that I did not know about this process. And again, we'll have the recording available, and we'll also have the slides available for anyone who's interested in those. And I see Danielle and April have both put their emails in the chat, so you can reach out to them if you have more precise questions about the info in this training. And thank you again. This has been great.
Thank you for having us.
Yes, thank you.
Jennifer, the recording will be on the ACT website, but I will also send it out to everyone who has registered for this meeting.
All right. I don't know, Eliza, if you have a few minutes after this to connect.
Sure.
Perfect.
Thank you for the presentation. It was great.
Oh,
You're
thank you. We appreciate
very
that.
welcome. Thank you.
If you aren't able to log off now, I am going to put you in the waiting room just so we can have a little debrief and have a great day.